In September was supposed to be the triumphant return to the office after almost 2 years of working remotely for many organizations around the United States. But is it the right time to return to the office? In this episode, we discuss this topic with Nancy Halpern. Nancy is a business consultant who coaches leaders, executives, and entire organizations around the world. Hi, Nancy. How are you? I am so happy to have you today as a guest.
Hi, Juan Carlos. Thank you for having me as a guest. I'm so pleased to be here.
Nice. Thank you so much for your time. Nancy, more and more companies are requiring employees to return to the office at least 3 days a week, suppose starting in early September. At this point, do employees need or should go back to work in the offices?
JC, that's a really complicated question because what I've noticed is so much of it depends on the type of work they do, the industry they're in, the leadership of their organization, the geographic location. So that is not a yes or no question, as well as an individual employee's immunity, their comfort with being vaccinated or not being vaccinated, their own health situation, their own life situation. I think one of the reasons it's getting so much press is because it's both very individualistic
Mhm.
and also very macro when you think about the economy. So there's a gazillion things to look at in that question.
Because many CEOs say that their companies function better when employees can interact in person. This made me ask you is an article that you shared some weeks ago from Wall Street Journal entitled "The Boss Wants You Back in the Office Right Now." So, why do bosses want workers back to work? Do you think it's more productive work in the office than work from home because people are having burnout? People are so tired of Zoom, Slack, etc.
Well, I take a rather cynical approach
Mhm,
to why bosses want you back in the office now.
mhm.
Yes, absolutely. There are some leaders who recognize the value of in person collaboration and they feel their business has suffered from lack of it.
Mhm.
However, there are also many leaders who have commitments to large real estate deals
Right.
or other rents, and they have to maximize that investment. Otherwise, they're just really wasting all that money. I also believe that there are certain leaders, and it might be age based in some ways, to be frank, because you
Mhm.
don't see tech companies sharing the same approach and perspective,
Exactly.
where they feel more, they know how to manage people when they're there.
Mhm.
They don't know how to manage this. And they're afraid that if they can't see you, how do they know what you're really doing? But, my thought is that's more about process than it is about output. And certain companies run on process. They don't actually run on output, if that makes sense.
Okay, so do you think that the bosses have to be working in adaptability to the new process work in the office or hybrid situation, right?
Yeah, I think many companies treated COVID and lockdown as a pause
Hmm.
in their regular operations. So if they just patiently waited, everything would return, sort of like flipping a light switch off and on.
Oh, I see.
But while they were home, what
Hmm.
was really happening was a seismic revolution in how people think about work.
Hmm. Yes.
And now that that's continuing, I know many companies who moved their return date from early September
Hmm.
to undetermined. They won't even cite a return to work date
Exactly.
because they don't know. So, yes, of course, bosses and managers and leaders have to be more elastic in their thinking,
Hmm.
but I don't think they've approached anywhere near the amount of creativity that they need in order to address how much the work world is changing.
Exactly. Because according to Harvard Business Review, more than 40% of employees will quit or start to looking for new jobs if the bosses or the new policy say, hey, you have to back full time. So what are your thoughts about this 30%, 40% is a good amount of employees. Very interesting point from Harvard Business Review. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's a big number, right? That's a pretty scary number. On the one hand, you do have to look at results like that with about a pound of salt. Because it's one thing to say, to thump your chest when you're still at home employed and say, I'll resign if you make me go back to the office. It's another thing to actually hand in that resignation letter.
Mhm.
Having said that, I think where companies are most at risk of what's being called the great resignation
Right.
is new in terms of the levels of the organization we're talking about.
Hmm.
So before, the fear of resignation was higher up in the organization. The people who were thought of as flight risk, key talent.
Hmm.
That's not the case now, however. What HBR is, I think, referencing, and if not, I believe it would have been good to include this, is lower level back office support, right?
Hmm.
All those functions that you cannot run a business without, be it finance, IT, the sort of support functions.
Right.
Those people can be far more nomadic.
Hmm.
There are because that is all work you can do from home, and they will happily, and I don't think with much difficulty, find companies happy to hire them and let them figure out how they want to do the job.
Oh, I
If
see.
you lose, let's just pick a number, JC. Let's say you lose 20% of those people in your organization. We will have that HBR number.
Right.
You're out of business. You can't. You're
Oh,
out of
yeah.
business. And so, how will you give those people either the freedom and flexibility they may demand without everybody
Hmm.
wanting it, right? So, I do think there's lots of risks out there, and I think HBR is right in terms of the fact that there are real problems like this looming for almost every company.
And in this article, something that caught my attention is the employees that would quit, they didn't mention the money. That is a very, very good point. They didn't mention money, just I will quit or find another job.
Yeah, money has been misunderstood in a way, and that's perhaps very American. I'm not sure. But money is not always every individual's key motivator. For some people, the motivator is what used to be called, euphemistically, I think, work life balance. For other people, it's challenge. For other people, it's flexibility. For other people, it's collegial engagement. So I think during lockdown, lots of folk have had the time to reevaluate how they want to live. And one of the biggest things they realize is they hate the commute. That's
Exactly.
not, yeah, that's not about being back in the office. That's about this horrible time when you are either packed like sardines into a train or a subway or on the highway. It's that they hate. And how will you give people a good reason to leave home? Why would they leave home?
Exactly. But Nancy, there are a lot of research that mention, for example, that shy people is more productive at home than people who are more social. People who are really social. What about these people who really feel more productive working at the office? How we can handle this kind of situation? I met people, you too as well, say, Juan Carlos,
Yes.
I hate work at home. I want to go to the office. In the counterpart, we have another people, I feel okay working at home. So how handle the
It's
situation?
a tough one. I think for people who prefer to work in the office, I know many people who have kept going to the office. Sometimes it's not so much for the social aspect of it, but
Mhm.
because they really can't work at home. Their apartment isn't set up for it, or their house
Right.
isn't set up. They don't have the right equipment. They have documents or high speed printers. There's various, their spouse or children are driving them nuts. There are various reasons. And I think those people will be allowed back in the office. I don't think for right now, right? I mean, the whole concept of the office is, I think, will be changing as well. But you bring up a
Mhm.
bigger point, JC, I believe. And I'm sighing because it's such a hard thing to achieve. How do companies ensure they're evaluating
Mhm.
talent equitably? If you have someone who's at home, if you have someone who's in the office, whether or not they're an introvert or an extrovert or because they have a preference, how do you make sure you're evaluating them in a way that's fair. Because just because someone is visible to you and you can see them doesn't mean they're doing a better job or they're more talented or they're more successful. So I'd like to say in a perfect world, you want to stay at home, stay at home. You want to go to the office, go to the office. But not only do we not live in a perfect world, we also don't live in a world when we work where we can make all the decisions. And I think part of what's happening is there is a unresolved struggle between about power. Who has more power? Your organization, which tends to have rules and processes because there are many people involved and you have to have some standard operating principles, or is it the newly empowered voice of the employee who says, I'll resign if you make me do that? Well, that's a huge shift in power dynamics. And I don't know where that's going to go, but it's really interesting to watch.
It's a very challenging topic for all the company, from the last employee to the CEO or vice versa. Nancy, the remote and hybrid arrangements are the alternative solution in this case. Mhm.
Yes. The reason I'm answering it that way is because I think that there are more sophisticated
I
ways
see.
to look at solving this problem. So, hybrid, for example, is really just a giant scheduling exercise. That's all it is, right? It's we're going to figure out which department can be here on Tuesday and Thursday, or which level of people function, can be here from 9 to
Mhm.
1 versus 1 to 6. But I think that if you, and there are some companies doing this, if we decide to look at, let's just say, dependencies, for example, let's see, marketing, product development, and sales have a dependency. One person needs someone else's work to finish before they can do their work. Right? So, how do those two functions work
Mhm.
best together? What makes them productive together? Right now, companies are looking at it in an individualistic way or in a sort of functional way. But that's really more for ease of making
Right.
sure the office isn't too crowded. They're not looking at it in a cross functional or, let's say, product driven
Mhm.
way or service driven way. They're not looking at it in an output driven way. So I think really companies could pull back and say, okay, we need like some fancy pants
Mhm.
AI here to help us with this, but we have, let's say, multiple locations, or we have a business plan with these three objectives. Even if you're a small company, you still have objectives. How does work actually
Mhm.
get done in this company? How do we get from the idea to the
I see.
happy customer? And how does workflow into
Mhm.
that chain? So I think that's a more organic. I'm not saying it's
Right.
easy.
No, because a process and involve a lot of logistic and many things in the same time. It's a huge challenge, right?
Right, but COVID is a huge problem.
Yes.
So I don't know why people think huge. Sometimes huge problems have easy
Yeah.
solutions, but I actually think if you find the right question to ask, if you identify the real problem, often the solution suggests itself.
Exactly.
If the real problem, for example, is how do we maintain safe social distancing in our
Hmm.
office, then duh, hybrid's the answer, right? Because then the answer would be, well, we can't have more than X number of people in this office, so only X number come in. But is that really the question you're trying to answer? If the question you're actually trying to answer is how do we maximize productivity while recognizing that employees don't want to be in an email factory anymore?
Exactly.
How do we do those two things? That's a very different question.
Nancy, I would like to ask you a very, let's say, danger question.
Okay. Uh oh.
Should employers require mandatory vaccination for their employees? In my opinion, they should have been fully vaccinated. What is your opinion?
My opinion is the same as yours, but it is our opinion, isn't it? I think you will see more and more companies, however, moving in that direction. And I do have one client who, a few months back, did fire an employee because they had a requirement that you be fully vaccinated, and this employee did not want to get vaccinated, so they fired her. And I think United Airlines has that policy now. Certain government agencies have that policy now.
Hospitals in Houston, they were one that required mandatory. The CEO say you have to be fully vaccinated.
Well, yes, they do. And in fact, there was a hospital here in New York City. Oh, I'm really surprised to hear that about Texas, given that they don't have any mandates about masks. But here in New York City, where there is a mandate, I can't remember what percentage of the employees in a hospital in Staten Island walked out because they refused to get vaccinated. So I also think, but we may be straying into rocky, choppy waters. The fact that public health has become politicized, I suppose, is unavoidable. But at the other hand, a private company can make whatever rules they want to make within the bounds of. I don't think there's anything legally to prevent companies from doing so. I think they are worried about a flight risk from the unvaccinated. But I don't know how else you're going to make it happen.
Yeah.
I don't think incentives are the right way. Having better candy if you get vaccinated, that's silly, right? But lose your job if you're not vaccinated, that would make me think about it a little
If
bit.
we are speaking about return to the office, I think they should be fully vaccinated, in my opinion.
I agree with you. In my opinion, is exactly the same.
Exactly.
But obviously, there are people who don't feel that way. And I can't believe you're not going to have lawsuits about this. I mean, my sister, who's an attorney, tells me I'm wrong, but she always, and like most older siblings, she knows she's right about everything. And she'll never listen. Hopefully, I'm safe. I don't know. But I can't believe there aren't going to be lots and lots of lawsuits. And, if I were an employment attorney, I would have bought my own Hawaiian island by now because I'm sure we're a very litigious society. There's no way there aren't going to be lawsuits about this topic.
Nancy, we are almost done with this conversation. Is there anything that you would like to add? Any suggestion?
Sure, I would give new thought and reflection on your commute. I don't mean the logistics of it, but how can you make it less hateful? How could you use that time for yourself, which does not mean working? It means how could you make it better? Do you want to do something unrelated to work? Do you want to read? Do you want to write? Do you want to meditate? Do you want to talk with trained friends? But to sort of treat it as the transition from two parts of your life that you now recapture. I think the other thing is if you have a family, I think you should
Mhm.
sit down and have a family meeting or even just a partner about the strain and the stress and the
Mhm.
readapting to a new kind of life. And what does that mean for everybody in the family? I think you should also have some open hearted, if you can, if you feel psychologically safe at work, in the office, with your manager, or sort of some permission that this is a transition and set clear expectations about what that looks like. And I guess the last thing is there's been a lot of emphasis on burnout and stress, and really focus on taking good care of your mental health. We used to think mental health meant mental illness or a lack of it, but not anymore. We know mental health means having
Yeah,
some
exactly.
sense of
No,
contentment, feeling in some
not
sense
anymore.
of control the way you want your life to unfold. What it might not be a bad idea to write down about if in any ways at all your life has improved during this period and then come up with two actions for how you can retain and maintain that improvement. Those would be my suggestions.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Where people can reach you for more information, for more insights? I know you have your podcast, your YouTube channel, webpage. Please feel free to share with my audience where people can reach you out.
Well, I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn, where I spend a lot of time hanging out. There are some free resources on my website, getpoliticaliq.com, as well as nancyhalpern.com. And if we connect on LinkedIn, I can put you on my mailing list for my newsletter, which comes out twice a month.
Perfect. Those links will be in this episode. Nancy, I would like to say thank you so much for your time.
Oh, JC, I want to thank you. I was really flattered. It's an honor to be here and be able to speak with you today.
Thank you so much. I am JC Giraldo from Boston, United States. Thank you so much, everyone.